Did everyone recognize Tinita Tikaram just playing now on the playlist? Tinita Tikaram, c'est une des chanteuses qui fait partie de l'œuvre de Sonia Boyce, de Feeling Her Way. Donc, on a pensé mettre un peu de l'ambiance avec une de ces chanteuses incroyables. Welcome, everybody. Bienvenue à cette conférence avec trois artistes incroyables, Sonia Boyce, Marigold Santos et Rajni Perera. On va juste commencer avec un applaudissement parce que c'est fou d'avoir ces femmes-là ici ce soir. No, it's pretty epic. I mean, come on. Je tiens à souligner, je vais juste commencer à souligner que la Fondation PHI est située sur les territoires non cédés des peuples Ganyegaga, Huron-Wendat, Abenaki et Anishinaabe. En tant que colon de parents immigrants, je suis reconnaissant envers ces communautés en tant que gardienne des terres et des eaux sur lesquelles nous nous réunissons aujourd'hui. Et je respecte les liens continue avec le passé, le présent et l'avenir dans nos relations et je m'engage à contribuer à la protection de cette terre. I'd just like to acknowledge that the PHI Foundation is located on the unceded territories of the Ganyegaga, Huron-Wendat, Abenaki, and Anishinaabe peoples. And as a settler of immigrant parents, I am grateful to these communities as custodians of the lands and waters that we are able to enjoy. And I respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships and vow to contribute to the protection of this earth. De la part de notre fondatrice, Phoebe Greenberg, je voudrais vraiment vous souhaiter bienvenue et merci d'être avec nous ce soir. On behalf of Phoebe, our founder, director, I want to thank you so much for being with us tonight for such an incredible event. I want to thank Victoria Carrasco. I want to thank Sabrina, where are you, for doing all this, getting this all together. You did a fantastic job. Our technicians and everybody who took the time to get out here on a pretty crappy last day of April. So thanks for that. La déroulement, comment est-ce qu'on va faire ça ce soir? We're basically going to have a convo. We're going to talk, we're going to each talk about work. We're going to talk amongst ourselves, well, as a group, I guess, but we want this to be a big conversation. And so, like, a good amount of time is reserved for your questions. Vous pouvez poser vos questions en français, je vais faire mon mieux de traduire, donc soyez à l'aise à utiliser la langue que vous souhaitez utiliser. And now I want to get into bios, because these bios are pretty hot, okay? So check this out. Sonia Boyce, D-B-E-R-A, damn Sonia Boyce, is an interdisciplinary artist and academic working across film, drawing, photography, print, sound, and installation. She came to prominence in the early 1980s as a figure in the burgeoning British Black arts movement with figurative pastel drawings and photo collages that addressed issues of race and gender in Britain. In the early 1990s, her practice evolved to embrace a social practice that invites improvisation, collaboration, movement, and sound with other people while exploring questions of artistic authorship and cultural difference, being critical while playful. Since graduating in the early 1980s, Sonia has consistently worked within the art school context and has taught for over 30 years, in addition to holding an active art practice. In 2014, she became a professor at University of Arts London, where she holds the inaugural chair in Black Art and Design. A 3-year research project into Black artists and modernism culminated with a 2018 BBC documentary, Who Ever Heard of a Black Artist? Britain's Hidden Art History, which explores the contribution of overlooked artists of African and Asian descent to the story of modern British art. Sonia was appointed member of the Order of the British Empire, MBE, in 2007, officer of the Order of the British Empire, OBE, and Dam Commander of the Order of the British Empire, in all for services to art. In 2016, Sonia was elected to the Royal Academy of Arts in London, and in 2023, she was elected to the American Academy of Arts and Science in Boston. Her work is in many UK and international museum collections, including Tate, Victoria and Albert Museum, Centre Pompidou, Hirshhorn Museum and Sculpture Garden. And if that's not enough, Sonia's 2022 immersive installation entitled Feeling Her Way, presented in the British Pavilion at the 59th International Art Exhibition at the Biennale de Venezia, was awarded the prestigious Golden Lion for Best National Participation in 2022. And we have the massive honor of presenting the North American premiere that will go on to tour to Toronto as part of the Toronto Biennial of Art, and then to the Art Gallery of Nova Scotia in Halifax. Let's give Sonia another round of applause. Your next Marigold. Marigold Santos was born in the Philippines and immigrated with her family to Canada in 1988. She pursues an interdisciplinary art practice that examines notions of heritage, folklore, motherwork, and decolonization presented within the otherworldly. Her paintings, drawings, sculptures, and tattoo work explores selfhood and identity that embraces multiplicity, fragmentation, and empowerment as informed by diasporic experiences. She received her MFA here in Montreal at Concordia University, and as a recipient of grants from the Canada Council for the Arts, the Alberta Foundation for the Arts, and the Conseil des Arts et des Lettres du Québec, she continues to exhibit widely across Canada. Her works are in a number of museum and private collections, and in 2020, she was shortlisted for the Musée National des Beaux-Arts du Québec's Contemporary Art Award, and was longlisted for the Sobey Art Prize in 2023, and, can I say it? Was longlisted for the 2024 Sobey Art Prize. Congratulations. Rajni Perera.
Dun, dun, dun.
Rajni was born in Sri Lanka in 1985 and lives and works in Toronto. Rajni seeks to open and reveal the dynamism of the icons, beings, and objects she creates by means of a subversive aesthetic that counteracts antiquated, oppressive discourse and acts as a restorative force. Her art has been exhibited nationally and internationally at the McMichael Gallery, the Museum of Contemporary Art in Toronto, the National Gallery of Canada, the Gwangju Biennale, Columbus Scope in Sri Lanka, and East Side Projects in the UK, among others. She is in numerous collections, including the National Gallery of Canada, the Montreal Museum of Fine Art, the McMichael, and the Sobey Foundation. She was awarded the Sauer Art Prize at the Armory Show in 2023, was the recipient of the MoCA Toronto Award in 2022, and was the Ontario Regional finalist for the Sobey Art Award in 2021. Rajni, woo! Yes! So I wanted to maybe move on to our little slideshow that we put together, because we wanted to walk you through a few kind of salient moments in Sonia's practice to just kind of get us started. And I guess what I wanted to start with was the drawings, because the drawings are where it all began, thanks to Mrs. Franklin. Tell us a little bit about Mrs. Franklin and your journey to the drawings that started coming out in the mid-1980s.
Sure. Thank you for the introduction. And I'm stunned by a number of people that have come to this event. It's a room full of beautiful people. Gosh. So yeah, when I was at school, I suppose what you would call high school here, my art school teacher, Mrs. Franklin, recognised that I was drawing all the time. Yeah. in the margins, on any bit of paper that I could find. I was always drawing. And I wasn't really particularly paying much attention to the fact that I was doing this. And she kind of took me under her wing and then started showing me books as part of our lessons about very old artists. And then wrote a letter to my mum saying, I think your daughter needs to go to the art school up the road. And just 2 miles up the road, where I live in London, I started going to art school from the age of 15. So I've been, I'm now 62, so I've been involved in the arts for a very, very long time. And actually going to art school, no one in my family knew what an art school might mean, because nobody in my family had ever been to one or been to university. So it was, my mum just kind of shrugged her shoulders and thought, well, if your teacher says that you need to do this, then you need to do this. And going to art school just opened up a completely new world of thinking and doing. And as a consequence, and I was a very good girl at that point, I was then told by my life drawing tutor that I needed to do a foundation. And then when I was on foundation, they said, you need to go and do a degree. And I just people told me, well, go that way, do this. And I kind of went. And as each opportunity opened up, just new things emerged. But I'm talking about the mid to late 70s, when there were no seeming examples of women of African descent, definitely, of the diaspora, being an artist. And I kind of felt like a real anomaly when I was at art school. There were a few of us, but it wasn't until I was in my final year on my degree course that I became aware that there were other practitioners. And I'd been very involved in kind of early feminist art debates about representations of the female body. And it wasn't until I was in my third year, I went to a conference which was just down the road, which was the first national convention of Black artists in the UK, that I realised that there were hundreds of other students and artists out there of African and Asian descent working that I had no idea of when I was at art school. And this kind of took me on another journey to start making work that I felt came specifically from my own lived experience, which is where this drawing starts to kind of enter, you could say, that discourse. I'd made this like a year after I'd graduated, but I began at art school starting to do these large drawings that would speak about, kind of growing up in London, growing up in the UK, and the experiences of discrimination, misogyny, racism, but also the other side of that narrative in terms of the kinds of stories that I felt I reveled in while I was at home, where what felt like kind of safe spaces within growing up in the city. And so this is an imagined me listening to, it's called Big Women's Talk, and it's me listening. I was always kind of listening in on all the gossip that would happen when my mum and her female friends would get together about who and where and what's going on, and them talking about back home, meaning the Caribbean. And so this was a drawing that was where I really started to kind of think about these narratives that I could possibly bring to life through drawing.
And the drawings, they're more than, they incorporate so many different media. So in some of the other drawings, there's also like photocopy cutouts and and different types of materials, markers, and so you start to get into this kind of like a collage, but they're always, you called them drawings.
I always call them drawings, but I mean, in terms of, particularly in terms of this drawing, when I was a student, I already had started to use patterns, repeat patterns, wallpaper designs as part of the composition of the works. And actually, the dress of the mother figure there is a kind of reworking of an artist called Nikki de Saint-Phal. So there's all these figures of these kind of Earth Mother-like figures that I made into a pattern that would then form part of her dress. And then a very, very bad attempt at the background of doing a kind of like wallpaper pattern design. But pattern and bringing different elements together and the question of collage was there from the outset of doing the drawings.
The pattern motif, when we talk about feeling her way, but other works before that, sort of predate the or forecast, I guess, the use of wallpaper in the installations. Mm-hmm. Then there's this work from 1986. Again, it's there's an autoethnographic approach in that you put yourself in the picture, and then there are tender scenes. Sort of both of these were tender scenes of sort of everyday life with people that you're close to, family scenes. But then they're sort of quietly subversive as well.
Mm. I mean, there were several things for me going on with this one. And I think maybe throughout my entire kind of art education, I was always kind of taught to think about where I might fit within art history. So this work particularly relates to a work by Frida Kahlo, where she says, my grandmother, my grandparents, my parents, and myself. So this is me reworking a Frida Kahlo piece where she's trying to kind of hold on to her lineage through her practice. Mm. And at the same time, there is a dialogue between, the parents and the kind of punky-looking female who appears to be holding them up, but actually is holding on to them, but is marking her difference, the difference, generational difference. And of course, then there's the very stenciled pattern of the black rose, which again was kind of symbol that I was using at the time to talk about trying to negotiate a sense of being British and black, and the whole idea about the English rose and where I fitted or not within that framework or that form of representation. So there's lots of contradictory things that are kind of, for me, operating in this work. But definitely the performative nature of Frida Kahlo. Frida Kahlo saved me when I was on my degree course in terms of being able to identify a form of practice that I could feel, oh, okay, I can see what I could do in that lineage, you could say.
Yeah, I when I read that you had an affinity with Frida Kahlo, it sort of, it really made sense that there was a real dialogue going on between what you were seeing and what she was doing and how that inspired you. And I was also thinking about the time period. So this is the lead up into the 90s, which was a really interesting time in terms of identity politics, and people kind of, I would say Barty Kerr had a similar experience that you did, where we asked her a little bit about, were you aware of the the power dynamics of being a person of color in Britain at the time, and she's felt that, in the 80s she was completely oblivious or somehow in denial, and then that was unavoidable. It was just impossible to deny when the 90s came, and there was sort of a wave of empowerment, something like what's happened since 2020, to affirm oneself within a particular landscape. So I was interested in how you were talking about going to this conference and seeing like you're not alone, that there's hundreds of people who are kind of working in isolation. And I think you might have met Lubaina Hamid at that time, yeah?
Yeah, so I met Lubaina at that conference. And the conference was in 1982, so quite early into the 1980s. And I met what became the Pan-African or the Black Art Group, who they were students that all had organised the conference, which I think is just a fabulous conceit, that at 18 or 19 you can decide, okay, yeah, I'm going to organise a national conference of black artists, and not knowing who's going to turn up. But they and it's become I don't know. I don't think they anticipated that it would become a watershed moment, but it was definitely the moment that kind of announced a kind of Black British art presence. And within that, there were people like Rashida Reen and Frank Bolin, who were at that conference, who were there to also remind us that there'd been previous generations that had come along and had made ways, but not necessarily under the rubric of recognising themselves in a kind of political sense. And for me, that's what the Black British art scene was about, was a rallying call, a political rallying call to recognise the social and as well as artistic conditions under which we were making.
Mm. Well, let's move into the 90s then, and by then you've had an active art practice. You've started to get to become recognized for your work, and then you're teaching. You're teaching at Goldsmiths and at Glasgow School of Art, and there's a kind of excitement around collaboration and experimentation, and then there's also this artist named Sophie Calle, who's making a bit of a stir because she's kind of working with people or instrumentalizing people within her practice, and that seemed to be really interesting influence on, well, what was going on around, but also your work. And then as a result, things came to a turn. This was the last drawing you made.
Yeah, this is the very last of the drawings that I'd become known for. And so I was really in a kind of very transitional period of trying to, I mean, one of the things that I particularly recognize about Frida Kahlo's work was that she was performing herself. So she was it was very quite didactic, that she was very aware of being looked at, that the images were there of her performing being looked at somehow. And so I kind of realized by the 90s that I didn't actually want to be looked at in my work, and that I wanted to look at others. And so kind of, you could say, turn the gaze somehow. And at that same moment, there was an emerging discussion. And actually, it was off the back of a longer legacy, one could say, from the 60s and 70s about social art practice. And I'm not saying community art practice. I'm talking about a different kind of art practice with someone like Lydia Clark and Helio Tisica, David Madala. There was a whole other way in which artists were going out into the world and engaging others in the production of making artworks. And this was kind of, in a way, Sophie Calle seemed to kind of be a condensation, you could say, of that impulse to get out of the studio. And it was very much happening in Glasgow, where students were being encouraged to not spend time on their own in their studio space, but to go out into the world and engage with the world. So I was kind of involved in all of those discussions. It was happening in Goldsmiths as well. And I was feeling trapped by my own drawing style, what I'd come to know and come to rely on, and felt that I couldn't really move away from myself. And so it helped being involved in these discussions about going out of the studio. I was also living in a very funky, you could say, household where we were all artists. We had our own dark room. We were dressing and undressing and taking photographs of each other and collaborating in very, very improvised ways. And all of those things really brought me out of myself, you could say.
So we talk a lot about sort of drawing kind of hit an impasse for you, that it went as far as it could go, and that for you, and that then there becomes a kind of evolution and a turn, and then, which brings us to this.
Yeah.
I'll show you. Oh, sorry, Sonia. I'll show the. Okay. Whoops. This guy. There you go. That's sort of the view. And here's just a detail. So yeah, so this brings you to this project, which is so different and yet not so different. Do you know what I mean? There's some really, now with retrospect, I can see the continuity and less of a rupture. However, in terms of process and how you let go of control, this is next level.
This is this work, and there's another series that's part of it called The Audition. I was doing a residency in Manchester, in the north of England, and I had been doing a number of works about hair and the Afro hair, and the ways, and I was making these very odd hair sculptures, but wanted to move away from making hair objects to actually taking images of people with these afros. And so I started, before this I'd done a couple of tries, you could say trials, by asking people whether they'd let me photograph them wearing an afro. Mm-hmm. And then as part of this residency, I worked with, there's an arts centre that used to be called Corner House, but it's now called Home, where for a whole day I was inviting whoever wanted to come and be photographed, but they had to be prepared to wear one of the afros. I had a series of afros that people could try. And in that one day, I took 900 images, black and white as well as in colour. And I wasn't really expecting that many people to want to engage and to want to be photographed. So I was quite exhausted by the end of the day. And it was really interesting, the range of reasons why people wanted to be photographed, to see what they themselves would look like with an afro. And so while I was taking these photographs, there was the group, the staff team, they were really lovely actually, and they were interviewing the participants afterwards, asking them, why they'd come for the day and what it was that they thought that was going to happen and what happened for them. And during the day, I started having conversations with some of the people who'd kind of wanted to participate in terms of, well, what does that mean to take on, to appropriate in those ways another kind of identity, and what it is that they thought that identity might offer them. And some of the people were really, it was very clear when I was photographing that we kind of we'd forgotten to say that I was black, inviting whoever wanted to come to be photographed. So some people got very nervous when they realised that I was the photographer. So there was all sorts of things, and I wasn't really telling anybody what they should or shouldn't do, or some people came in a group, some people came on their own. There was a couple who came who wanted to make out in front of while being photographed, which was fine. It was interesting. But it was, and in the end, what I decided, initially I'd call the project The Audition, but I wanted to choose what I thought would be a good image. And then as the day unfolded, and then reflecting on the project much later, I thought actually it's the whole day that is really very interesting in terms of this idea of identity being this kind of possibly this changeable thing, and what it might say about me, but also what it might say about the people who've taken part, and what is it saying about this sense of alterity somehow.
And you're basically adopting a new methodology of kind of creating a set of conditions for which people participate and engage themselves, where you don't even know what the outcome really could be. And that kind of relinquishment of control is what sort of sets the stage for, some future works.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I was doing this work, I'd put in an application to make a film. I had in my head this idea. Where I lived at that point in London, in Brixton, about 3 or 4 doors down from me were this set of twins, two African diasporic guys, who were clearly performers. And I would see them in the mornings, they'd run across the park wearing capes. And I was like really intrigued by who these guys were. And then I kind of thought, oh, I'd really like to make a film with them. And because I'd been doing all this stuff with afro hairs, I was thinking, oh, wouldn't it be interesting if one of them had an afro and the other, they were identical, so I couldn't tell which one was which. And so I had a day with filming them. I actually got the money for the grant, but I had written the application without actually asking them, and then had to go and find them. And I turned up about 10 o'clock one night, knocking on their door, and saying, I know you don't know me, but I'd really like to make a film with you. And so it was very. I mean, it was just I wasn't expecting to get the grant, so I didn't really think very hard about it. And anyway, so they realised when we hired a studio, had a producer and a camera woman, and I said to them, I want one of you to wear an afro and then the other one not to wear an afro and to kiss. And I had a very formalist sense about how this was going to work. It was very simple what I wanted them to do. But they very, very quickly, because they're performers, they very, very quickly realised that I'm not a director. And so they'd start with what I wanted them to do, and then they'd start to do all this other stuff and the producer would be looking at me like, is that what you want them to do? And the camera person would be looking at me, are we still filming? And actually, what I realised, of course, my ego was very dented by the fact that they'd worked out that I was hopeless as a director. But actually, what clicked into place as this unfolded was that what they were doing was far more interesting than what I wanted them to do. And that I had to that actually it was a really important lesson to not just have this kind of very formalist way of approaching the work, and the more that I've worked with people, the more I've recognised they give far more than I might ask them. And so if I just set the conditions for them to do something and see what happens, then often they produce way more than my own leanings would ask of them. And it does create a lot of anxiety. I'm not going to kind of lie that, bringing people, and I often bring people who don't know each other together in order to create something. And I'm very interested in this idea of the stranger, or the question about difference and how difference negotiates itself. But I've found that, that there's always something that happens, and it's always off the scale in terms of how interesting what evolves in that space of people being given a space to just try something out and to improvise and kind of get to know each other maybe a bit. And so that is what has kind of been my methodology for nearly 30 years now.
Yeah. Let's talk about this project because it takes you into this methodology, but then combines it with, I guess, a critical and engaged examination of social history. This is a really and starts. We start to gain an appreciation of your use of the voice.
So this I'm sorry, I feel like I'm taking really a lot of time here.
You're okay. You're okay. We're okay.
Scheduled, yeah.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. Very, very quickly. So there's a curatorial project that took place in Argentina, in the city of Cordoba, and artists were being invited. There was a small group of us that were invited to come and do a residency, but all of the artists that were in this show that was in 4 different sites was called a fuera, was about art in public spaces, and the curators, or particularly Gerardo Mosquera, who's a Cuban curator, knew that I'd been doing these works with people, and so I had put in a proposal, but we didn't do the proposal that I'd put in. And I'd never been to Argentina before, and I had very, very, very limited understanding of the political, social experience of Argentina, and also what kind of happened in the whole of South America from the 70s through to the 80s. So I was learning as I was there, and I was given a tour of some of the sites that I might think about working with. And there's a particular, it's called the Memoria Museum, and it was a former detention centre right in the centre of town. I mean, really right in the bang centre of town, next to the Catholic Church, next to like all of the municipal offices, really right in the centre. And this is was one of the 9 sites where Argentinian activists, academics, anyone who was, I suppose, considered a threat to the state in some way. They were, and children and women, and it was just such a phenomenal awakening for me to be invited to do this. Anyway, at this particular detention centre, they think about 2,000 people had been tortured and disappeared, and after, of course, the military dictatorship had finished, and that process of reparation of some sort, this particular detention centre has become a memorial to the atrocities that had happened during that period, and all of the photographs are of people that had disappeared. And so, and I really don't know why my first response when I entered the space was that I wanted to sing to the photographs. And so I asked whether there was a choral group, and there was a choral group that was part of the architecture department, and they were very keen to come and sing in that space. And through the conversations with the curatorial team and the choir, I was saying, well, we think there may be other people who might wish to come and honour in the same way. And so I did a short local community radio interview, inviting people on a particular day. I didn't know who was going to come to join. Actually, we had to stop people coming in. So many people were trying to come in to the space as we were filming. So literally, this was the last frame where people were trying to squeeze. We had as many people as we could fit into the main space as the choir was singing a song that I'm going to forget her name, so you have to excuse me. A song that is popularly known, which its title is a kind of prayer to justice. And so the choir was singing this, and people were coming, and it's like everybody was crying and singing at the same time. So this piece is actually only on YouTube. And
If you have YouTube, I don't know why I'm saying that, you should check it out on YouTube. It's so moving. It's astounding. I would show it here, but I figured, you can, yeah, in the privacy of your own home. Just quickly before, because you don't have to, yeah, maybe a mini, because Exquisite Cacophony is hilarious, because it's another situation where you bring 2 people together who don't know either, very different vocal practices, and then you put them in front of audiences and they have to shout out, like they do improv. And then they just kind of do their thing.
Yeah, so so I have been doing, and actually in Feeling Away, the Sophia Jernberg, who's in the work that's here, was introduced to me by Elaine Michener. Elaine Michener comes from a kind of experimental vocalist kind of tradition. I mean, she moves between jazz and extended vocalizations and art practice, voice as art practice. So she moves between different genres, you could say, but is very experimental and she really enjoys improvisation. And Andy, well, I should really call him by his stage name, Astronautalis, who is a US bass grunge rapper who often invites an audience when he does gigs to just shout out, give me a subject to kind of do a rap about, and you'll just turn it really around very, very quickly. And I brought the two of them together, and they met the day before, which was quite hilarious. But nobody knew what they were going to do, and we thought maybe we were all in the Victorian Albert Museum that they'd kind of sealed off for us to do filming, and we invited audience to come, and the audience really didn't know what was going to happen. The film crew didn't know what was happening. We didn't have a script for what they were going to do. They were just going to freestyle it and see what would happen. And it lasted for 2 hours, but we managed to cut it down to a half-hour film. And it's funny, and they're quite combative. And I really wanted that relationship between rap music and what some might call Dadaist noise to be this kind of interplay, really.
I love that work. It's really crazy, amazing fun. I want to we'll breeze through so that we can have a conversation together. But now we're looking at a still from installation view from Feeling Her Way. And this was, I think, the Leeds version. Is that right?
Yeah.
So Feeling Her Way, the 2022 work that was at the British Pavilion. Again, so you brought 4 singers together.
Yeah.
4 singers whose styles you really admired, and you admired each of their individual, sort of ways of writing and singing. 4 women who did not know each other, who had not met before, and who are all kind of very comfortable with having honed their own styles vocally and work very much within a song or I guess their own comfort zone, I guess you could say. And correct me if I'm, if you just look at me with, scowling eyes if I get it wrong.
No, you're good.
And then you brought them together to do something they'd never done before, which was to improvise to the direction of Erilyn Wallen, who's a vocal composer. And then you filmed them whilst doing so at Abbey Road Studios. And I know as a singer myself that it's extremely intimidating to improvise and to let go, especially in front of people you don't know, and to not be perfect and to not make a beautiful sound, because Erilyn Wallen provided all kinds of prompts. And they really, you put them in a situation and they really came through again with, you never know what people are going to bring in the moment.
I mean, they are extraordinary, all of them. So yeah, there's Erilyn, who's a composer, mainly opera for voice. There's Jackie Dankworth, who comes from a lineage of supreme jazz musicians, a vocalist mother and band leader father. There's Poppy Ajuda, who's the youngest of the artists that I was working with, who has a very soulful, very R&B kind of legacy, you could say, in her voice. Very beautiful. I mean, all their voices are incredibly beautiful. And then Tanita Tikaram, and we were listening a bit to Tanita as everybody was coming in. Some people may know her from the 1980s onwards as a very, was a global star and still performing. And yes, this first film, you could say, of the work. There are 10 films in total, and the first 4 films are the first 20 minutes when they first met, and they didn't really know what was going to happen. And Erilyn, who we found at the last minute, because Sophia Jernberg, who is based in Sweden but was in Norway at the time, and because of COVID restrictions, couldn't travel to the UK. We found out like a week before that she couldn't travel to be at Abbey Road Studios, and Erilyn stepped in and said, "Oh, okay, I can do some warm-up exercises, and then they off they go. And the other three singers had never done improv in that way and were terrified, but within 20 minutes they just do the most extraordinary vocal things. And throughout the whole, I mean, we don't have to do each of the rooms, but you will hear just the extraordinary talent of these musicians.
And you also get a sense of, so moving into installation, you've got the wallpaper again, which is a motif sort of activation since the drawings. But it makes sense that you go with installation, that you go with multiple entry points, that you have a kind of space that the individual moves through, and there isn't like a central point. You become the center. There are these sculptures that are made to look like pyrite or fool's gold, which speaks to sort of notions of value, because, you know, if you find fool's gold and you're looking for gold and you're really disappointed, but the reality is that pyrite has incredible properties.
Incredible properties. And we use it every day, actually. It's in a lot of the devices that we use. And but also, and I have to say this a little bit, that throughout, while panicking, you could say, trying to make this work for the British Pavilion, throughout the whole process, in my head at least, I wasn't playing it out loud, but in my head, I kept thinking about Goldfinger by Shirley Bassey. And so gold just kind of became this kind of motif that was kind of running throughout the whole. Plus I had Neve, who runs my studio, kept talking about glitter and gold. So, you know, I was kind of, it was just in the air, you could say, and trying to find ways in which I could bring people, visitors into the work without them necessarily having to touch the work or sit, because this was time of COVID and everybody, all these things were really difficult to bring people together. And then there's the memorabilia room of the collection that's been growing since 1999, that comes out of collective knowledge. People give me this stuff. They give me music items. This is a very tiny selection of 6 months between September 21 and April 22 before the show. Just a small collection of things that had been donated or things that I'd bought. Yeah,
so these are items that are from the devotional collection project you started in 1999, and it started with, you know, we were doing a residency with women in Liverpool, and you wanted to sort of get people to kind of break the ice by talking about, oh, who's your favorite sort of Black British singer or musician? And everyone was sort of like, oh my God, who? And then they came up with Shirley Bassey.
Yeah, but that was after about 10 very awkward minutes of silence, and people couldn't think of anyone. I could similarly ask the question in this room, you know, who's your favorite Black Canadian female singer? And it might take you a while. Mm-hmm. It might not, but it might take. It came as a surprise to us as a group that we couldn't think of anyone, and then the first person to enter the list was Shirley Bassey. At which point we all sang Goldfinger. No, we all sang Big Spender.
Big Spender. Yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one to do in a group. And so there's sculptures in this part of the installation that incorporate this pieces of memorabilia with the pyrite, and really pay homage not only to these incredible singers and musicians whose names need to be remembered and who are part of a growing 300 list of names.
A list that I mean, by the end of the initial project, there were 46 names. Yeah. But there's now over 300 names, and they date back, up until last year, they dated back to the 19th century, to the present day, but now it's gone back as far as the 18th century. But people just keep giving me more and more information about performers that I need to include in the kind of the building of an archive, really.
I'm just showing the volcano with, so that's Sophia Jernberg on the left and Jackie Dankworth. So they also each did individual performances that Sonia has sort of painstakingly put together as sort of a duet. And then throughout the entire space, you get a sense of all their voices working together from the different videos. They freeze and dovetail. create a real polyphony of voices, and can't wait for you to see it. Sonia, we're doing the talk show thing here, so we're gonna bring in our other guests, Marigold and Rajni. I'm just gonna sort of cycle through a little bit of images that are in the show, so that tell you a little bit about the context for the show. It was originally thought that Sonia might have both buildings. We have two buildings, 465 and 451. Sonia very wisely chose to just present Feeling Her Way and then to just use the 465 building, which meant we had a whole other building. And racked our brains. Dominique Fontaine, I had originally, approached to curate Sonia's show, but then when two things happened, Sonia decided just to do Feeling Her Way, and Dominique became one of the co-curators for the Toronto Biennial of Art. I mean, that's a bit of a load. So it's like, okay, Dominique, you got to do that, and we'll figure it out. Something will happen. The Armory show happens in New York in September 2023. Sonia's is there presenting work as part of Appalazzo's booth. And then I knew that Rajni had invited Marigold to work on a piece so that they could both be part of the Patel Brown booth at the Armory show. So it was like, great, I want to go, let's go, check it out, support all these incredible women artists. And then just gonna cycle through these. Those are Marigold's works. This is Rajni's. Just to give you a sense of their individual practices. And then this happens. This is the booth at the Armory show that was really the inspiration for the exhibition.
It was the best booth at the whole fair. It was. Bar
It
none.
was.
Thank you.
So Sonia's there, and I'm thinking, I'm walking through and I see this, and it's like, damn, this could be the show. And I kind of amble back to Sonia and I say, so, the other building, thinking about some artists, I don't know, like, did you see anything in the fair that really sort of, excited you? And this is what she mentioned. She's like, I saw this did you see this sculpture? And she's like, that's the only thing that I remember that affected me so. And I'm like, well, great, because maybe there'll be the other show, Marigold and Rajni. And it was just like, yes. And that's, unbelievable, amazing synergy.
It was the only booth that I took photographs of the work.
way.
Honestly,
Yeah.
you can ask Neve.
That's a real honor. That's cool. Thanks. It's true.
Pretty amazing.
Thanks for liking it.
So I have to take us back then to 2020 because we had a show, Relations, Diaspora, and Painting. Both of you had paintings in it, and Rajni had never seen Marigold's work before and came to Montreal, saw, kind of stopped, like did one of those.
No, I'd seen it on the internet. I hadn't seen it in
sorry.
person.
Okay, so take us back to the moment then when you first saw her work in person.
Yeah, I came to Montreal just like on a trip, and then it was during Relations. And then this is before I went to the Esker. It was like, this is its first open. And then, I'd met Marigold at the Esker. Now I'm realizing that's also weird. This universe, huh? What a universe we live in. It's so intelligent. Marigold had come up and said hi to me, and I thought she was so lovely. And then came to see Relations. And then it wasn't in the same room as me, but it was just like on G2 maybe. And I was like, what the fuck is this? Like, it's so
Who is this
beautiful.
master?
Who painted this? And then Cheryl's like, that's Marigold's work. I was just like, oh my God. Because in person, it's you're such a gifted painter. Like, you can't, I don't know. I feel like my work looks a little, not the new work, maybe Traveler series. Looks very similar on screen as it does in person. But this was a whole other thing, and it was like lots of texture and hair. It was like a very hairy, cilial work. So, and I was just really blown away by that. Yeah.
Thank you, Rajni.
Hey, it's no problem.
Thank you.
Anytime.
But then you thought, I want to invite Marigold to do this booth.
We've been big fans of each other's work for like a really long time. Yeah. So Devin was like, okay, we're going to do solo. Mind you, they had already scheduled me for Solo Expo Chicago, which is the work that most of it is what's in your show, in this show, because there's more demand than I can supply at this time in my career. That'll come and go. That's totally cool. But that's the way I had to do it. But, for that booth, I was just like, well, I would like to pair with somebody to do this booth, someone that it will really work well. And whose work I love is Marigold. And she had just recently started working with Patel Brown Toronto. So I was like, okay, let's do this. It'll be good for both of our careers. I get to work with her then and do something together. It'll just be something that can grow both of us and nurture both of our practices, hopefully. And I think it did.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. For sure.
Yeah. All about growing.
I mean, it's the helping each other, it's supporting each other too. Like that's a really
it's the only way
part
we're
of it.
women of color artists. That's the only way to.
We gotta stick
Amen.
together. No, and it was so amazing to just be, Devin had said, hey, so what do you think about this booth thing with Rajni? And I was like, I mean, yeah. Why are you even asking me? Yes. And then he's like, okay, well, I'll get in touch. And then Rajni called me on the phone, and then it was a really, hey, and it was amazing. Like we just, kind of we're on the same level right away. We discussed things on the phone, and we'll talk a little bit more about the sculpture, but that phone conversation was really like the start of sort of planning for it, and then it happened really quickly. But that phone call was like sort of the beginning.
We came up with this whole thing by phone. The whole sculpture just on the phone.
On the phone, texting images to each other. What do you think of this?
It's weird laughing. But
it's true.
Really
I took a picture of myself on the ground. I'm like, what do you think of this pose? What about this?
How about that?
Texting it back and forth. There's stuff in the background of my living room. What do you think of this? And then, so it happened that way.
And you only had also like some like really dodgy drawing that you kind of...
man, ugly drawings of this? Ugly planning drawings? Yeah, we got a couple of those.
Yeah.
But we had like such a short time span to work on the sculpture. We had 2 sets of 3 days each to work on this. So we really went real fast. But the fabric, there was like longer term fabrication that we just planned and had shipped and then worked on that on site just to make things easier.
And you did this all in Montreal.
This has all been
Darling.
made. This sculpture has been made down the street at the Darling Foundry.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Really marathon sessions, though.
Oh
right?
man.
Just look at it.
We're laughing because we're traumatized. No. It was mostly like really joyful and fun, but like, tiring. But unfortunately, we're also used to that.
Yeah. And I think like why it happens so seamlessly and so well is because Rajni and I just have parallels in the way that we work and the way that we think and the way that we trust. And so it was a really fun and seamless event. Like it happened so quickly and so fluidly. And I think like when we work, and I can speak for myself, but I feel like you can relate to this, is that there's a lot of intuition that you don't really second guess. You just kind of you go and you trust that. You trust what you are doing and what you're responding to. And I feel like we really jive on that same thing.
Yeah, not that there weren't like hitches, but it's like you had said a great term, which is so like country time, but it was a can-do attitude.
Can do.
But it's true. It's
true.
like really a thing, not to be corny, but that's real. Because if there's a hitch, we're both like, well, how are we going to work this with like a smile? Because it's an opportunity to solve a problem instead of like, oh my God, no. And then
There was no
going in-
time to know.
There was no time to do that, but
Yeah.
also, I mean, that is another mentality, which is like, let me spiral because like it's too hard. And neither of us, so we're really lucky. I think we don't have that. We're
Yeah,
just like, okay, let's
just go.
Let's just fix it.
And you're both makers, I mean, in the sense that it's very handwork. And there's some affinities within, I guess, some of the motifs in your work, like a lot of hair.
Yes.
Back to the hair thing. Also, the ornamentation, pattern, the use of botanicals that are also, highly linked with the mythologies of your respective heritages, and the histories, the material culture. So it's like a kind of a match made in heaven that you should all then be able to make. Like, we're just going to make a bunch of these, little pieces for the mask. And like, I want to know a little bit more about, let's do this, let's do that. Let's put tusks on the,
I mean, it's also a match made in like latitude and longitude. Like we're both like our origins are equatorially
Close.
proximal or whatever. And like, we think of the same kind of flowers and the same kind of terrain. And like the banana flower came up, and then we're both like, yeah, banana flower boobs. 100, it's gotta be.
We were like, ooh, breastfeeding.
What else would you
boobs.
do? Yeah.
Let's talk boobs.
Yeah.
And so it was,
It was easy. There was not like, oh no, I would like a cypress thing. There's nothing like that. We're tropical babies, so it's like we needed to bring that like heavily.
I think too, when we're like generating ideas, a lot of it is just like, I mean, I would say 99.9% of the time it was like, let's do this. Yes. Let's do this. Yeah.
Yeah.
There was
We're
never,
not minimalists.
Yeah. And there was just never
it's
like,
just works.
I cannot even think of one moment where it was like, no. It was always like, yeah, let's do it. And then that sort of reflected in the way we were making it too. Like it's a relatively large sculpture and you'll see it. It's like, 3 times the size of a person. And there was a lot of work to be done in a short amount of time. So, Rajni would be on one side working and I wouldn't really see what she was doing and I'd be on another side working and we would come together and just like after, a couple hours, like, hey, let's see. Oh, yeah. Okay. Let's see what I did. Yeah. And so it was a lot of like trusting in that moment and knowing that the other person was doing what they were going to do and whatever they did was going to be amazing. And just coming together and then, moving back and forth like that. And it was just also like a matter of like being efficient with our time and enjoying that time, which wasn't difficult because I feel like, that's how I work. And I know that, time is of the essence for me. I'm a mother and I don't have all the time. I have to make sure I'm super conscious of how I use that time. And, I feel like Rajni has a similar experience. So it was, a very easy thing to get in line with.
Let's talk a little bit about the title, because the title of this work, Efflorescence, The Way We Wake, is the title of the show. Yeah, tell us more, because one of our educators, I think he's here, was asking all about efflorescence and, does it have to do with flora and fauna, but actually it has to do with other kind of chemical processes.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay.
Tell us.
Well, it's a joint title.
So you can talk about efflorescence and then I'll talk about the
Yeah. So first of all, the title is a collaborative title. So I came up with Efflorescence and Rajni came up with The Way We Wake. And titling work is really important to us, both for our works. For me, it's like an entry point it's a little clue into what you're seeing. Sometimes you don't have the opportunity to always hear an artist talk or to read about the work. So sometimes the title there it serves a really nice purpose, and it can also be really ambiguous, And then so for me, picking Efflorescence was there was several words that I was like thinking about, and essentially initially I was really thinking about this idea of in the process of becoming or flourishing or blooming. It can mean many things. It can mean drawing out from one source and dispersing it amongst another. And when I was thinking about that, and based on the conversations that we were having on the work and what what our experiences meant to us, and sort of things that are thematically continuous in our works, I was really thinking about us sort of like this ripple effect of like blossoming and like creating a collaborative work and having that exponentially be experienced outwardly. Also, like using botanicals in the work can be really representative for me of like cycles of growth and cycles of experience, lived experience, death and decay and onwards. Thinking a lot about like mother work and thinking about how, generating a future, thinking about my child's future and like this onward ideas of like root systems and our heritage and all of that. It just factors in there. There's so much to mine when you think about that. So for me, it was a really appropriate initial title, and I thought that it was really great to use as the title for the work, for the show.
For the way we wake, I was thinking about mostly the way that diasporic communities, or borderless or marginalized communities like transmutate their surroundings into themselves, and like the other way around too. And you had mentioned rot and like coming, falling apart and coming back together. And rising in such a way as that, like there was like an ascension, but like a transmogrificative ascension that all happens together. So that's something that I was thinking about in the way we wake. And it's also like, I was thinking about work too, and the way that we construct ourselves, the way that we construct one another, and like the communities that we're a part of, and like our surroundings as well, often with like very low, how do I say this, like very low minerals in the soil or something like that, like low nutrition, but high output, like an extremely efficient organism. So I was just thinking about that for the way we wake, it's a way of waking up, which is transformative, like you're transforming yourself into an awoken state.
Plus, whenever we would like talk about her, we'd be like, she's getting ready.
She's getting ready to leave the house now. There was like a lot of fashion talk. It's like, and it's like literally like shoving moss into a hole. It's like she's getting ready to leave the house.
This is her. This is how she wakes up. Yeah.
Very glamorous.
Oh no, I love it, and it speaks to both of your interests, and you too, Sonia, to a large extent about resilience, about thriving and within often inhospitable terrain, negotiating how to show up, how to show up in the world with what you've got, and then rocking that to the maximum. I would love to, just before we go to questions, have each of you just speak to, I was thinking maybe Marigold, if you wanted to speak to this work, that it's part of a larger installation that's in the show, but this quadriptych. Do you want to give us a little insight into this?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's so much to say about all the pieces, so I'll try to summarize it, and then if there's further questions, we're going to have a Q&A, so for sure, feel free to ask a lot more questions, but I just don't want to take up too much time. This is a series of 4 paintings. They are connected in the bottom by this sort of 2 poles that are representative of tinikling poles. So in the Philippines, there is a traditional dance called tinikling. Any folks here, Filipinx? Yeah. Yes. Represent. Thank you. So you know the dance. So it's like a traditional dance. It's performed throughout the country. And it's recently too, it's really incredible because the dance has been really claimed by the diaspora. Films really like integrating new music, contemporary music with it and contemporary dance moves. But traditionally, it is a dance where there's two pacemakers on the end and then either one or two dancers dancing in and out of bamboo poles to a particular rhythm in between the clapping of the poles that the pacemakers are holding. And so the point of the dance is to keep this rhythm and to do these like gestural flourishes while, missing intentionally the clacking poles. And so these particular paintings show a series of them doing a dance. And when I had conceived of this painting, I remembered how this dance is kind of memorialized in homes throughout the Philippines and in the diaspora by wooden relief sculptures made of like really hard polished wood, and it's usually like a cutout of the dancers. And when I think about the landscape of my youth, because I was born in the Philippines, and I look back onto our family photographs, there's always this dance in the background, like in the walls. And so I really wanted to kind of think about this and reconfigure the ways that we think about dance, movement, and integrate concepts that I'm thinking of now in terms of like moving through life, moving through space, moving through experience, how we nurture community, how we build community, how we do this together and not in just an individual way. I talk about selfhood in this, so each one could be one of the same or it could be the different individuals, but they're all together. And then each individual painting has a lot more to say about each one. When you go to the show, if you go visit this floor, you'll see that there is a soundscape that accompanies the piece. The soundscape is of me reciting poetry that I wrote in Tagalog, which is like my first language, a language that I no longer speak fluently but understand fluently. And then in that floor as well, or on that floor, there are booklets where you can read along the poetry that I wrote. It's translated from English to Tagalog and French. So it's really beautiful, and it really ties in some of the little clues that you're going to see in these paintings. So yeah, it's a really special series for me.
Thanks, Marigold. Rajni, I'm wondering if maybe which one? This one or
What are the other ones you got? Let's go through.
I got this and I got this. I got this.
Let's go to the Deitch works.
Okay.
Yeah, that's good. Sorry to call them that. That's so. Ugh. Waiting for Sanyaka is the name of these works. So yeah, this is me starting to, I was painting I don't know if anyone knows about the Traveler series for like a really long time about immigrants and the future and mutation and armor and protection and all sorts of stuff like that. Yeah, it's dropped on the ground. Yeah, I've started going back home to Sri Lanka for different reasons, mostly being called back to make work and show work and tell stories back home, which it's like such an honor and a privilege. But learning more and reconnecting with the folkloric, like witch doctoring practices of the southern coast of Sri Lanka, which are now like greatly diminishing. So we've been colonized 3 times by the Dutch, the British, and the Portuguese. So as a country, even the Buddhism there is colonial Buddhism. It seeks to it has the same mechanics as like Christian Catholic colonialism, and it like does the same thing, has the same mechanics, which is very sad because, I do love Buddhism on its own. And I was a proud Buddhist before I saw how it's all going down now. It's like just a shame, But anyway, it's been very healing and nourishing to look back, start to research back into these practices of witch doctoring and exorcism. And this practice, the scene that's going on inside the bodies is an exorcism, and they're waiting for Sanyaka. Sanyaka is the king of the demons. So Sri Lanka is home to over 7,000 different demons and monsters. Some of them are worshipped, some of them are just talked about. I mean, it's like a hotbed in the world for, you know, the dark side of spiritual activity, even like UFO sightings and like studies of possession and like, you know, healing and exorcism. It's just like this mecca to go to. You can learn a lot and see a lot of really weird shit. But what's going on in the body is an exorcism gone wrong. So on this side, you can see inside the body, the guy has fallen down. You can see his feet pointing up. He's fallen down on the ground. And on the other one, you can't really see it in this image, but you can see the eyes of Sanyaka coming out of the forest and then the practitioner facing away from him. So it's like the scene before a possession, and then it's just an exorcism that's gone wrong. Because yeah, I just made, you know, it's a story that I made up about something that goes on all the time. But, you know, there are these magical times during dusk and dawn when I'm back home, and you can, you know, we regard them as portals in these practices, and the times to start it, it's 6 p.m. you start it, and 6 a.m. it ends, and it's like 12 hours long all through the night. You know, Tovil and Sunny are like beautiful magical practices that are so theatrical and comedic and colorful and like really elaborately made. Like their objecthood is also stunning. So that's something else that I'd love to go and start to research and like maybe apprentice with helping them make shrines and objects for healing. If they will have me, you know, just like someone to fold the coconut fronds together or whatever. So yeah, that's the scene, and that's what I'm starting to look into. And there's quite an expansion. This is kind of the beginning of a new wing of work, and it's all in the show. It went to Expo Chicago for a couple days. That's it, and then it came here. And yeah, I'm really excited to kind of like. I really love making myths and investigating myths and mythology. And, you know, this is a time where I think diasporic mythology is needed more than ever before. So I just kind of like, I'm really leaning into this as something that's healing me. And it's also something that, I don't know, I hope that people would want to see.
Mm-hmm. So the show is organized in a way where you have a sense of how their works have great affinities, both conceptually and formally. And then there's Rajni has her own floor of works, and Marigold has her own floor of works. So you really can you know, get a great appreciation of that depth and breadth throughout the show. All right, so I'm going to put on a slide that sort of speaks to 3 words that seem to come along a lot in your work collectively. And I'm just going to throw that up there as we open up to questions. Let's open up this conversation a little. And if you have, just put up your hand, and Sabrina will come around with a mic. Because we're recording, just want you to speak into the mic. Si vous voulez poser une question, il faut juste le poser dans le micro. Comme, voilà, on a une question en arrière, au fond en arrière.
Thank you. Hi, Marigold. We've never met, but I'm Raquel. So I work in the show for Université de Montréal.
Yes, hello.
And I wanted to ask a question specifically for you and for Rajni. Recently, I had to go back and study a lot the body of work of a Cuban artist that is called Belkis Sayon.
Yes.
And she died really young. And I'm thinking of how you said, sometimes we don't have the material and the voice of the artist. We only have the work and the titles. And Belkis, as people who knows her knows that she works with the myth of the secret masculine society Abaqua, which was not, women were not allowed. So she kind of invented a lot of it while mixing it with information she had access, privileged access sometimes to. And at the time, people read her work as very folklorist and kind of paying attention to create a Cuban kind of mixed hybrid identity. But Belkis didn't understood her work that way. She was trying to debunk or to analyze the cracks in the myth, in the foundational myth of the secret masculine society called avec, because the myth is based on the treason of a woman, so they ban women from their society. So she was trying to go back to that foundational moment and trying to understand, is this really a treason? And what is our relationship with these women that was banned, and that was the cause of banning of every woman? So I just wanted to ask, because of the last part of Rajni's intervention also, what's your relationship to myth? Are you debunking it? Are you reaffirming it? Do you think that you're going to be perceived as folklorist? I mean, yeah.
Sorry, it's perceived as what? Can you
As
say that?
like folklorist.
Folklorists.
Yeah.
I don't know what that means. Can you explain what a folklorist is?
It was the way Belkis was perceived at the time in the 90s. It was perceived as a person that was working with folklore and folklore imaginaries, but she was really working with the myth, with the foundational myth. So it was tricky and complicated because her work was really misunderstood, and she took her own life really early with 32 years old. So we really don't have her voice. We only have what we can interpret her from her work. So yeah, that I wanted to know a little bit more about that for your own. How is it, this relationship with foundational myths of your cultures that you are working with?
So with my works, if you're familiar with my works, you'll see that I reference a Filipino folkloric character called an aswang. And traditionally, aswang can be known sort of in pop culture as like this witch creature character, shapeshifter, hybrid identity, but nothing like so firmly defined, because it just changes with region to region and the storyteller and as time moves. And that's sort of the beauty of oral tradition. And so when I make my work, I reference this particular folklore character, but I reconfigure it. So I don't really want it to talk, it's not simply illustrating the folklore for me, because the folklore is really far away from what I'm talking about. The character of the aswang, what I initially was drawn to, first of all, I was being told that story since I was a kid, and it's scary. I was always attracted to scary things. But why it was so scary was this is supposed to be a figure that has the ability to self-sever. So she cuts herself in half, and then she flies around in the night, and then she hunts, and then she eats you and other things, and then she has to come back together at the end of the day. So for me, I really use that as a metaphor for this idea of like diaspora and diasporic experiences, where like one half of you is sort of tethered somewhere or left someplace else. The other one is maybe elsewhere, and maybe not just in this binary way, but in multiple ways, so you're not just being severed. But the character of the aswang in that mythology comes from colonial violence. There's a very deep history of where that mythology has come from. And it's not necessarily spoken about when you talk about the mythology or the lower mythology of the aswang to Filipinos in the homeland or even in the diaspora. It's not common knowledge to know that actually there's a deep and violent history for why this mythology was even created. And she was born out of like a lot of incidences that happened during Philippine colonization by Spain. And so for me, it's not necessarily retelling the folklore. It's using this character to reconfigure, to upend it, and then to invert it again so that I'm giving power to where the power wasn't before. And I'm rebirthing this narrative so that it speaks differently about it. So it helps to know about the folklore, but the folklore isn't at the root of it, really. It's just a vehicle for me to be able to talk about other things, and knowing that that sort of stems from that is a part of it.
Yeah. I'd say that my relationship to myths in my work is probably pretty personal. Like, okay, there's a work in the show called Lover Not a Fighter. And it's a story about the daughter of the demon king Ravana, that is the Indian mythological king of Sri Lanka, who was a monster himself and had monster children. And, I think one of them named Kuvani was very pretty, actually. And she had the power to turn herself into a leopard and sort of like stalk around in the night, but also like appear in people's dreams. And then a king from North India, so, we've been colonized before our triple white colonization, we had other colonizations. And I mean, that's the way that Sri Lanka became a hub internationally for a time because of this as well. But anyway, comes down from the north, and then Kuvani seduces him in his dream by appearing as this beautiful leopard woman and sticking her tongue out at him. And then, eventually down the line, he they hook up and he knocks her up and they have children. In the original story, she's murdered for this because she trespasses castes. And it's used as a warning story not to trespass castes because you'll be killed. And the children were just lost to the wind. And in this story, in my painting, she cuts his head off and she's flying away with holding his severed head on the back of a crow, but she's crying. You can see her tears coming. So it's like, I really use myths as a launch pad to talk about my own psychology, the reason why these are, not just why these myths are put together, but not just that, but also the way, who they're told to and why they're told, why stories like this are told back home. And I guess I feel angsty about some of it, and I just paint it. So it's like psychological for me and like personal for me. And some of them, even though the imagery is so beautiful and I want to investigate it, I still feel like ways about these stories, and I try to talk about that as well. So I hope that answers.
Do we have another question?
Anything at all. Make it weird. Keep it weird.
Shy group tonight. Oh, yeah, Dana. Here we go.
Hey,
So many questions, so many.
For everybody. Okay, first I want to start with you. Your work, the audition. I wonder, did you talk to each person afterwards, or did you see any change in how they were once they put the Afro wig on?
So the way in which we kind of set up the scenario was that there was a kind of pre-room before the studio in the space, and so whoever was coming to be photographed, they would gather in this pre-space trying on the different wigs. And so the first time I saw them was with the wig, and then I would say, oh, well, could you take the wig off? So I did, I saw their Afro self, you could say, first. And some people were, it depended really on the groups, whether they came singularly or whether they came as a group. Those that came as a group were more engaged with each other than with me, because it was, they'd come together to try something different out. And it was usually more in the one-to-one, because I was pretty close to the people that I was photographing. So I could tell that some people were a bit surprised about, they didn't, because I hadn't said anything about who I was in the advert. We just hadn't thought to put anything in the advert about and I could tell that there was a sudden awkwardness about what they were doing and what I was doing. So them putting on Afro on, which they'd done in another space, and then they come to, and then they're seeing that it's me, and some people's eyes were a bit shifty, didn't quite want to look at me. I wasn't trying to direct how people looked in the camera. Some people kind of half smiled, and then there were two women that came towards the end of the day, and that was really interesting because they were both at first more interested in each other performing, And then they kind of slowly stopped and said, you know, this is really a bit weird, what's going on here. And then we had a really long conversation about them coming to do what they were doing, and started to kind of question why they were doing it. And we then started talking about the politics of appropriation and you know, what does it mean? And but also, you know, I don't know whether the case happens here, but definitely in the UK, a lot of the kind of if there's a fancy dress party or if there's a dressing up party, there's a lot of people who will dress up in afros.
That's why I asked.
And so it's very, you know, it's as a kind of as an artifice, it automatically triggers laughter, and people don't necessarily know why. And of course, through the research that I've been doing, know that actually what this afro as a kind of disembodied thing has come to represent is a kind of parody of the black body or the African body, and then harks back to slavery and minstrelsy, and all of those things are really just under the surface, actually, of when we see the afro, and the afro used in a comedic sense. So we then started to have this conversation about the different levels at which they were starting to feel really troubled by what they were doing. But nobody, I hope, nobody coerced them to join in, to participate. But once they were in that moment, once the kind of jollity of it had kind of dissipated, they then started to kind of question what they were doing and what I was doing, photographing them doing it.
So it wasn't intentional that you were not telling them that you were a woman of color. That was just
No,
by chance.
we just didn't think to put it in the advert.
Yeah.
And I suppose if we had thought, then there would have probably been a long discussion about why that would be necessary to say that.
But ironically, it showed
It
a
emerged.
difference in when they saw you.
Yeah.
And that's what's interesting to me about it. Like when I first saw the images, I actually thought they were mixed, like me. And then when you told the story, I was like, it's amazing how the texture of their hair changed so much who I thought they were.
Yeah.
And it's so subtle seeing them next to them with their hair straight or whatever. It's really messes with my head. It's very interesting.
What was also, I mean, you know, in terms of reflecting afterwards about the, you know, who came to the day, and 90% women had come to the so there's all sorts of questions about what kind of identities, in particular white females, feel they have access to and can occupy, and why that is. But there were also women of colour who came. But 90% of those who came that day were women.
Interesting. Thank you. Thank you.
Do we have one more, or did you? Oh, okay. Let's do one more down here.
Hi. Question for Marigold and Rajni. What's your creative process like? Where do you start? Layered. Probably it's a long question, but I'm like, it's so layered, your work, and visually amazing. So it's like your research, you start pasting and copying, like just, yeah.
Yeah, I just start working. I don't know. I personally don't sketch a lot. I'll think about the thing that I want to do, and I'll start doing it until it's finished. Yeah. So, and then my materials research is just like over time from when I started painting and doing funny, cool things when I was a kid until now. That's my whole materials research. Sometimes I'll look for something to get a job done. So, for instance, the new works are translucent. You can see past it. So there are parts of the picture plane that I needed to be more translucent where there's beads on top. And then there are parts that I needed to kind of look opaque from the side or another angle. And I'll just experiment with different things until it shows up the way that I want it to. I barely ever throw something away that I don't like it. I'll work on it until I am satisfied, and then it's complete. So that's as best I can summarize the way that really the ins and outs of how I work.
So, yeah, like, how do I answer this question? So in my schooling, I'm trained as like a printmaker. And so that was when I was in school, in art school, I spent the most time learning this one particular process. And within printmaking, there's a lot of processes, but I don't do printmaking anymore. But what I see is that I take from how I learned to make images, and I apply that into the various different media that I work with. So like Rajni, I work in so many different mediums, right? So, I tattoo, I draw, I paint, I make music, I make sculpture. Sometimes I dabble in film and video making things. Sometimes behind a camera. I'm so nervous behind cameras. But anyways, all that said, the process comes from, like, where I take my inspiration from is from the everyday, truly. So there's research that I will do because I'm curious about my history or curious about histories in general or something in particular about a mythology or folklore. But those are just like starting off points. And then they're informed and they're peppered by all sorts of things like conversations I have with my toddler or sometimes the shows that he watches. And actually most recently, very much the shows that he watches. So he's really into sea creatures right now. He can like list 100 sea creatures. And so can I, which is like a new thing, it's a new thing for me. And so I just want to be open about how, like, because your question's about creative process, right? And so I want to be, I'm open to the things that come into my brain and out. And so for sure, I'm like watching and learning along with him, which is an amazing thing. But I'm picking the things that I find appropriate for what I want to investigate. And then they all go in my notes app or like my sketchbook that has no drawings in it. It's just notes. And I might say, we'll make a painting that has somebody with a ponytail or something like this. I don't really draw things out because I find that what printmaking did was it exhausted my ability to be spontaneous. And so now what I do is I don't belabor something. So similar to Rajni, I don't overwork something. I don't spend so much time on it. When I feel like it's time to bring that to the surface, then I'll do it. And I'll work on it until I'm finished. And then I don't like to overwork it because I also get really bored. And that's also the reason why I have a lot of different new skill sets. Like tattooing is relatively new for me. Working in ceramics was relatively new for me. Those are things I'm not classically trained in, but they're things that I was interested in. And I wanted to learn how to make different marks and how to relay the stuff that I want to do in different ways. So like no training is really going to stop me from doing those things. I'm just really interested in whatever idea is living here or something, and then just somehow getting it out, and whatever means necessary, and having fun doing it. So I would say like that's the best way for me to answer that question.
Thank you so much. Merci beaucoup pour toutes les questions. Thank you very much for sharing with us. The show opens, we have a vernissage on Thursday at 5:30. So please come and celebrate these shows and come and check them out. The show will run until September 8th. So lots of time to come and then come back. And really just sort of have a real moment with these incredible exhibitions. I just wanted to give a little plug before we wrap up for an event that's happening on May 14th. Ça va être ici, dans cette même salle, le 14 mai. It's a panel qui explorera les moyens par lesquels l'industrie canadienne du récit peut promouvoir l'inclusivité en mettant en valeur un large éventail d'expériences humaines plutôt que de se concentrer uniquement sur les récits marginaux. Il y aura des invités, Preach, Emily, Nicolas et Myriam Charles, et elles exploreront la façon dont le storytelling est un outil pour construire une communauté de narration plus équitable et représentative qui élève et donne du pouvoir à toutes les voix. Et ça va être animé par Georges Camarotti, qui est un cinéaste canado-brésilien. Et cette discussion sera l'occasion aussi de lancer un programme de développement professionnel qui est Invisible Voices. Donc, ce programme est un programme intensif, en fait, soutenu par les résidences filles de 3 jours et une soirée finale de présentation qui donnera l'opportunité à 4 à 6 créateurs, créatrices et conteuses de la diaspora africaine basée à Montréal de bénéficier de classes de maîtres et de sessions de mentorat présentées au Centre Phi. Et les artistes peuvent envoyer, si vous êtes intéressés, vous pouvez envoyer un dossier de candidature jusqu'au 2 juin via un formulaire en ligne sur le site web phi.ca. Alors, vous êtes tous très, très, très bienvenus à poser votre candidature. On that note, thanks again. I want to thank Sonia Boyce, Marigold Santos, Rajni Perera. Merci à vous tous. Thank you so much for coming out. Bonne soirée.
Merci.
Whoa, 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 whoa.